Welcome all of you for this exciting online webinar on wider contextualized biblical hermeneutics, jointly organized by the Church of South India and Ecumenical Christian Center. I'm going to present you the speaker for this evening online seminar. With immense gratitude, let me introduce Professor Dr. Johnson Thomaskutty, an eminent and brilliant scholar. Professor Dr. Johnson Thomaskutty is Associate Professor and Dean of the Graduate Program at Union Biblical Seminary, Pune, India. He studied Bachelor of Divinity from Faith Theological Seminary, Kerala, MTH in New Testament from the Gurukul Theological College, Chennai, another Master's in the New Testament from the Princeton Theological Seminary, USA, PhD with a distinction from Radboud University in Nijmegen in Netherlands. He has successfully completed postdoctoral studies from the Princeton Theological Seminary. He has published a number of books and presented quality scholarly papers around the world. This evening, Professor Dr. Johnson Thomaskutty will be presenting on Incarnation of the Word in John's Gospel. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Johnson Thomaskutty, for joining with us. Over to Professor Dr. Johnson Thomaskutty.
Hello, friends. I hope that you are able to hear me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So is that sorry for coming late because I had some problem with my laptop. Now I'm speaking through my phone. And so we have a very significant topic today evening time, Incarnation of the Word in John's Gospel. First of all, I thank ECC, Ecumenical Christian Center, and the Church of South India for organizing this wonderful series of lectures. And a special word of thanks to Father Dr. Matthew Chandran Kunnel and the entire team of ECC for taking leadership in this significant series. So is that Incarnation of the Word in John's Gospel. Let me say some introductory aspects. There is a significant difference between the Synoptic Gospels and the fourth Gospel. While the Synoptic Gospels initiate the story of Jesus from an once upon a time perspective, John, its narrative time perspective. Is that these are two different perspectives. While Synoptic Gospels, that means the first three Gospels of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, they initiate the story from an once upon a time perspective. But John is deliberating the story from once before time perspective. The usual pattern of telling stories is once upon a time, then the story ends with, and they lived happily ever after. Synoptic evangelists follow this pattern. That means Matthew, Mark, and Luke follow the pattern of the normal way of telling the story. How they begin the story? Once upon a time, there was a man called Joseph, according to Matthew's Gospel. And according to Lucan version, once upon a time, there was a woman called Mary. And then the story moves further. That is the way the Synoptic evangelists deliberate their stories about Lord Jesus Christ. But when we come to John's Gospel, in John, different from the Synoptic Gospels, the evangelist takes the starting point back to the beginning of all the beginnings. Okay, taking our attention back to the beginning of all the beginnings. Hence, John's story begins as follows. How? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Thus, the Gospel of John and the book of Genesis begin with the same expression, anarchy. That means in the beginning. As we know that the book of Genesis begins as follows. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Similarly, John begins, in the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Thus, the Gospel of John and the book of Genesis begin with the same expression, anarchy. In that sense, John tells the story from once before time perspective. John tells the story different from the synoptic evangelist from an once before time perspective. As Barnabas Linders rightly says, John's gospel is in several ways a midrashic interpretation of the Genesis creation story. The author of the fourth gospel develops everything in his own idiom and attunes the Old Testament ideologies toward his Christological framework of the gospel. Hence, it was not accidental that John did not include either a genealogy or an infancy narrative. As we notice, we know that in John's gospel there is neither a genealogy nor an infancy narrative. Last Thursday, we were discussing about the infancy narratives in the synoptic gospels. In John's gospel, there is no infancy narrative. Do you think that John was accidentally not including the infancy narratives? No. In John's gospel, John was deliberately not including the genealogy because John's gospel does not need a genealogy or an infancy narrative. So hence it was not accidental that John did not include either a genealogy or an infancy narrative. These narrative snippets are not necessary for the Johannine way of telling the story of Jesus. John's story does not begin with the worldly genealogy of Jesus, but rather his beginning is narrated as the heavenly Son of God. Jesus is the heavenly Son of God. Rather than presenting Jesus as son of David or son of Abraham, as we see in the Gospel of Matthew, or as the son of Adam, as we see in the Gospel of Luke, here Jesus is neither presented as son of David, nor presented as son of Abraham, nor presented as son of Adam. But rather John presents Jesus as Son of God. Son of God beginning. So rather than presenting Jesus as son of David or son of Abraham or son of Adam, he is presented as Son of God. The Greek word logos is generally means word, speech, account, story, or a message. The prologue of John. John's prologue means chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. The first 18 verses of the Gospel, prologue of John. The prologue of John introduces Jesus as the incarnation of the divine Logos, which was active in creation. The mission of the Word was or is to reveal the Father. That means John has a revelatory function. So logos is the verbal noun from the Greek verb lego. The three basic meanings of the verb are: first, an objective meaning is there. That means the rational ground for basis of something. The second one is the subjective meaning, the power or faculty of reasoning or thought. And the third is an impressive meaning or a rhetorical meaning, thought or reason as expressed in speech or in writing. So depending on the context, logos has a wide meanings. Explanation, argument, theory, law or the rule of conduct, hypothesis, formula or definition, narrative, oration, communication, conversation, dialogue, oracle, proverb or saying. Is that a myriad possibilities there? So in that ways, logos is a multifaceted word, a word with pregnant ideologies and pregnant, semantic domains. So while synoptic evangelists are more historical, John is more poetical. You see the difference, my dear friends? While synoptic evangelists are more historical, John is more poetical. While history is more to do with the tangibles, poetry is more to do with the eternals and the universals. So in that sense, John's ultimate aim is not to deal with the tangibles, but rather his ultimate aim is to deal with the eternals or the universal. That is why John is more poetical than historical. In that sense, John's logos has an all-encompassing power. John's logos has an all-encompassing power. Instead of using the term Christ, which would have aroused suspicion or a political understanding in the minds of his Jewish readers, John chose a familiar term that conveyed clearly God's dialogue with the people of all religions and streams of philosophy. Jesus, the dialogue of God in flesh, became the core subject matter for the narrator to describe various aspects, like God's dialogue within, its outward expression through sending the Son to the world, and human response to it through the expression of faith in Jesus. In Greek philosophy, logos signifies that which gives shape, form, or life to the material universe. In that sense, logos is the force or the power behind the created world, the beauty that is manifested in the world. In the New Testament, it is used in a more general sense of the word. Logos is used 128 times in the Gospels. That means in the first 4 books of the New Testament, the word logos is used 128 times. That means according to the Nestle and Allen Greek New Testament. Matthew has 38 occurrences, Mark has 23 occurrences, Luke has 32, and John has 40 occurrences. Matthew and Mark use logos in a non-philosophical sense. You see, my dear friends, Matthew and Mark use logos in a non-philosophical sense. Luke in a more practical sense. John in a particular way to refer to Jesus. In the 4th Gospel, or the Gospel of John, the author uses it with an idiosyncratic and in a more philosophical and contextual sense. That makes the word different in John's Gospel in comparison to the other 3 Gospels or the rest of the New Testament. In the 4th Gospel, almost every occurrence of logos occurs in some syntactical sequence with Jesus or God. For example, John chapter 18, verse 9 and 32. But the use of logos in chapter verse 1 to verse 14 has been the focus of much scholarly investigation during the last 20 centuries. So all these details demonstrate that John accommodated a term that was popular in various streams of thought and popularized toward the author's own theological ends. Evangelist. The author was very particular about using the popular terminology and its conceptual framework, and at the same time he was distancing its meaning toward his own Christological and theological master plan. So that is the most important thing that we need to understand when we read the concept logos within the framework of the fourth gospel. Is that the ideology logos was prevalent in the Greco-Roman world? Some of the similar concepts are embedded within the Jewish narratorial framework, but John was using a familiar terminology, but he was distancing its meaning or semantic domains toward his own idiom and his own theological end. The second important aspect I would like to highlight is religious philosophical background of logos. We need to know from where John would have got this idea logos. There are several assumptions, etymological discussions, and theological arguments prevalent in the Johannine scholarship regarding the semantic, syntactic, and pragmatic details of the concept logos. In that sense, we need to pang deep into the question, what is the source of John's use of logos? From where John got it? On what grounds John the Evangelist uses this particular expression of Jesus? Scholars have assumed that by determining the source of John's language, the meaning of the word would become more clear. Is he borrowing it from Greek philosophy, from the proto-Gnostic source, from Jewish ideas, or from a combination of two or three of these? That is an important question we have to answer at this particular juncture. Many have asserted that in his prologue, again, prologue means the introductory section of the Gospel of John, chapter 1, verses 1 to 18. Many have asserted that in his prologue, John has taken over a so-called logos hymn and modified it to fit his story of Jesus. The context in which the logos hymn was composed has been a matter of debate among the scholars. Was logos hymn Christian, Jewish, proto-Gnostic, or utterly pagan? That is another significant question we have to answer. Above all, the ultimate question is, what did the evangelist mean by using the term logos in chapter 1:1 and in chapter 1:14? Early church father Justin Martyr. Justin Martyr was a 2nd century church father. He lived between 100 AD and 165 AD. So Justin Martyr seems to have developed a logos doctrine first. As a converted pagan philosopher who generally followed a Platonic type of philosophy, that means what he could see in Platonism and the Neoplatonism of his day. He found logos as the all-pervading reason. Is that logos as the all-pervading reason, which gives form to and governs the universe. Okay, that is the opinion of Justin Martyr, the 2nd century church father. Justin Martyr interprets the logos of John chapter 1, 1 and 14 in the Platonic or Neoplatonic sense of reason, as it was used by Plato, Heraclitus, the Stoics, and Philo. For Justin Martyr, the uniqueness of the Christian logos lies in the incarnation. Is that the uniqueness of the Christian logos lies in the incarnation? Justin's logos doctrine is paralleled or developed in Clement of Alexandria. He lived between 150 and 220, and especially Church Father St. Augustine, who lived between 354 and 430. Bultmann, one of the celebrated New Testament scholars or Johannine scholars, suggested that an ancient pagan mythological speculation lay behind the Johannine idea of the logos. In that sense, Bultmann connects the source of Johannine logos with an Iranian Gnostic sect. Others propose a Hellenistic Jewish background, for example, Alexandrian Judaism, for logos in John. It was exemplified in the wisdom of Solomon and in the writings of Philo. The wisdom of Solomon generally uses Sophia or wisdom instead of logos. Sophia is sometimes given the philosophical attributes of logos. Philo, the Jewish philosopher who flourished in Alexandria, Egypt, combined two systems of thought in his ideology. The divinely inspired writings of Hebrew prophets and the philosophical discussions current in his day. In that sense, Philo combined the ideals that New Testament from the philosophical traditions of Platonism and Stoicism. For Philo, following the principles or philosophical ideals of Plato, there are two worlds: an ideal world of ideas of which God and immortality are a part, and a phenomenal world in which is a physical copy of the ideal. In Philo, Logos stands for the word by which God created the world and a mediator between the ideal and the phenomenal. According to Heraclitus, a 6th century BCE philosopher, the Logos was the eternal principle of order in the universe. The Stoics saw the word as the mind of God, the principle of reason within the universe, controlling and directing all things. Use that a lot of philosophical background, Greco-Roman philosophical background behind the concept logos in John's Gospel. Now let us come to the Jewish understanding. The Jewish background is convincing in the logos concept in 4 ways. The Aramaic concept memra, that means word. In the Jewish Targums is well explained in Genesis chapter 15:1. There we see that I will be a shield for you, and my word or memra will be strength for you. In that sense, the background for John's use of logos was the Aramaic concept of memra as the explanation of God's relationship to creation. Could be that logos in John 1 is a reference to wisdom. Another terminology we see in the Old Testament, Chokmah, Hebrew terminology, in Proverbs chapter 8, 22 till 31. And other wisdom passages in the book of Job, chapter 28. In Proverbs chapter 8, Lady Wisdom claims to have existed with God before the beginning of the world. In chapter 8:30 of the book of Proverbs, she even claims to be the artisan that at God's side by which he fashioned the world. A third suggested Jewish Hebrew background to John's logos. That means the first 5 books or the law of Moses. In Psalm number 105, the Torah is called the word of God, the word of God. Later, Jewish theology added the Torah of the few things which, and a fourth Jewish background suggested some is the probable Hebrew translation equivalent to Logos to Theyu, the word of God, which is Dabar, Yahweh, the word of Yahweh. Like Logos, Dabar can mean word, thing, matter, speech, cause, promise, or plan. There are several references about that. So it's that among the scholars there are 2 opinions. The first opinion is the Johannine concept of Logos has its background in the Greco-Roman world. Another view is that the Johannine concept of Logos has its background not in the Greco-Roman world, but in the Jewish world. So for both the scholarly opinions, there are references, both in the Greco-Roman world as well as in the Jewish scriptures. The above details from the religious and philosophical world suggest that Logos concept was existent in the Greco-Roman and the Jewish thought world. It was conceptualized at various levels and was one of the semantically loaded terminologies. John the Evangelist used it as the author was aware of its popularity and comprehensive nature. He accommodated it for his theological ends, disrupted with new semantic axioms. Now let us come to John's Gospel, word in John's Gospel, how the concept Logos or word is used in John's Gospel. As suggested above, John was using a widely popular and semantically inclusive terminology toward his own ends. Verbal similarities do not necessarily imply conceptual similarities. Only when one document is understood in its own right can it be compared to another, which must also be understood in its own right. This being the case, a person reading through the Philonic corpus and the Gospel of John will probably notice many verbal similarities, though they will undoubtedly come to the conclusion that John and Philo, when they use the word Logos, are referring to different concepts which hardly overlap. For Philo, the Logos is the reason inherent in the universe, whether that reason be divine or human. It can mediate between God and man. This Neoplatonic concept of the Logos is foreign to Johannine thought. As the Gospel unfolds, Jesus, who is the Word, claims to have had a personal relationship with the Father before his incarnation in this world. In that sense, Philo understands the Logos as a distant entity from the divine world. His position is always in between the divine and the human world, according to Philo's understanding. It does not have a relationship with God. It is inferior to God, and it always remains under the ideological framework. These are the things we need to understand when we think about the word Logos in Philo's writings. Once again, let me repeat. For Philo, he understands Logos as a distant entity from the divine world. His position is always in between the divine and the human world. It does not have a personal level relationship with God. It is inferior to God. And it always remains at the conceptual and ideological framework. A careful reading of John chapter 1:1 yields a wealth of information about the Logos. The verse is divided into three simple clauses, each of which contains the imperfect of the verb einai, that means to be. In each of the clauses, the verb has a different meaning. In the first clause, it means to exist. In the beginning, the word was in existence. The Logos existed in the beginning. The phrase in the beginning is an obvious allusion to Genesis chapter 1:1. So John is saying that at the very beginning of creation, the Logos already existed. That means Jesus was already existed before the creation of the universe. Opening with an echo of Genesis chapter 1:1, the prologue goes on to identify its protagonist as the Logos, the Word of God, and again an Old Testament background. This aspect of the gospel vividly demonstrates the gnomic and universalistic framework of the fourth gospel. The prologue 18 foreshadows the division between belief and unbelief, so characteristics of the rest of the fourth gospel. If the Logos is the protagonist of the extended story, those who do not accept the Logos are reckoned as the antagonists or the villains of the story. This makes the believing struggle more conspicuous within the narrative framework of the fourth gospel. In the second clause, the verb to be describes a relationship. The Logos was in the sense these terms. Therefore, Logos was distinct from God and at the same time in fellowship with God. So is that Jesus was distinct from God, but at the same time he was in fellowship with God. This is again the riddling nature of John. The Son is distinct from the Father, but in union or oneness with the Father. In the third clause, the verb to be is used in a predication in which the character or the essence of the Logos is defined. The word was God. A reference to the one God of the Bible is entirely possible in this clause. The church has understood that Christ is a deity based on this verse along with other passages, Philippians chapter 2:6, Colossians chapter 1:19, and Hebrews chapter 1:3 and 9. I may say that the word was God is the thesis statement of John's gospel. As the evangelist actualizes the thesis statement through the character of Thomas in chapter 20:28. The gospel as a whole is in an inclusion or in a bracket. In chapter 1:1, the word was God. In chapter 20:28, toward the close of the gospel, Thomas addresses my Lord and my God. So that Jesus' divine nature, Jesus as God, is one of the emphases of the fourth gospel. John chapter 1:3 and 4 describes the activity of the Logos. He is the agent of creation. All things came into being through him. And he is the source of true life, which is the light of all people. Later in the gospel, John expands on this activity of the word, which gives life and light. In John chapter 1:14, the evangelist describes the incarnation of the Logos. Here, John uses a different to be verb, that is ginomai, which to this point in the prologue, he has preserved for created things. The word became flesh. Note that John does not say the Word became a man. He uses flesh or sarx to signify the very nature of the incarnation of the Logos. After saying that, the incarnate Logos, here John uses a different to be verb, ginomai. So after saying that the incarnate Logos, Jesus Christ, he replaces the law given through Moses. John identified him as the monogenes theos, the unique one of God, who reveals unseen God. This Logos has a personal relationship with the Father. This theme of sonship continues through the fourth gospel and infiltrates the rest of the New Testament canon. The Word is the person of the Godhead through whom the world was created, who took on human nature in history and who the source of life and light for humanity is. John's use of Logos is in the rest of the gospel seems to imply that the word which goes forth from God's mouth to accomplish creation, judgment, redemption, and renewal. The word Logos here used in the context of Revelation. Beginning with its first sentences, the gospel asserts that Jesus is God's final revelation. The Logos in John is unique in several respects. Jesus is not a distant entity from the Father, as Philo says. In John, Jesus is in closer relationship with the Father. The position of the Logos was not permanently in between the heavenly and the earthly. According to Philo, the position of the Logos is in between heaven and earth. Okay, permanently. But in John's Gospel, it was a temporary arrangement from heaven. It was a temporary arrangement from heaven. Thirdly, the Word had a personal level relationship with the Father, not simply a distant relationship, as Philo says. Fourthly, the Logos was not inferior to God, as Philo says, but equal position with the Father. Fifthly, Logos was not merely a conceptual or ideological construct, but one who was tabernacled among the people, and the Word became flesh. Let me go little more incarnation of the word. Incarnation means bodied in flesh or taking on flesh. In the religious sense, it means the descent from heaven of a god or a deity or a divine being in human or animal form on earth. While John chapter 1, verses 1 to 5 talks about the pre-incarnate state of the Lord, John 1:14 talks about the incarnation of the Lord. At the pre-incarnate stage, Jesus was in the beginning, was in existence, was with God, and was God. It is also called the pre-existent nature of the Word. Jesus' pre-existent nature is associated with the beginning of all beginnings, the Father-Son union before the creation of the universe. In chapter 1:14, we see the pre-incarnate Word becomes incarnate in the person of Jesus. The Word becoming flesh is a unique concept in the God. As the creator of the universe and as the mediator between God and the world above and the world below, the Word became flesh and dwelt among humanity. In other words, as John chapter 1:11 says, he came to what was his own, and his own people did not accept him. This is the grand irony in the Gospel of John. He came to his own, but his own did not accept him. This is the tension we see all through the Gospel of John. His own people, the Jews, the apple of God's eye, do not recognize the Creator and the Savior of the world. The incarnate stage of the Word is a stage of accommodation. Jesus as the Word identifies with the patterns of this world. As Philippians chapter 2 verses 6 to 8 says, though he was in the form of God, did not regard equality with God as something to be exploited, but emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness, and being found in human form, he humbled himself and became one among the humanity. One among the humanity. In Colossians chapter 1, 15 to 19, we see the pre-incarnate stage of the world. And in chapter 120, the incarnate status of Jesus is manifested. In Colossians chapter 1:20, Paul says, and through him God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, by making peace through the blood of his cross. Here we see cross is the apex point of Christ's incarnation. In John's Gospel, repeated expressions like the hour of the Son of Man, lifting up of the Son of Man, and glorification of the Son of Man are culminated on the cross of Calvary. In that sense, in John's Gospel, different from the Synoptic Gospel, the death of Jesus takes more prominence than the resurrection of Jesus. While the Synoptic evangelists are giving more prominence for the resurrection of Jesus, in John's Gospel, more prominence is given for the death of Jesus. The pre-incarnation and incarnation stages are symbolically presented in the foot washing ceremony in chapter 13, verses 1 to 20. Though he was Lord, God, and teacher, he washed the feet of the disciples. This attitude of service and washing the feet of the disciples is a flashback to the death of Jesus on the cross. So I am coming to the final stage of my paper. Okay, there is no power here. I'm in darkness, but still, okay, I can see that you are hearing. The concept of incarnation and other religions. As John foregrounds a missional and incarnational theology, it is important to look at the unique features of John's ideology in relation to other major religions of the world. In Baha'i religion, God cannot be incarnated and descended to the world of the created beings because it cannot be divided. In Baha'i religion, God is a perfect mirror reflecting his attributes into this world. It is only the reflection of God from above can be experienced in the world below, according to the Baha'i religion. We get only the reflection from above. On that basis, we can live in this world. So while Baha'i religion emphasizes reflection through the means of mere reflection, John demonstrates God reflection through the Son in flesh, the heaven came in reality through the Son of God. But the common element is that God is benevolent toward the world. In Buddhism, as a non-theistic religion, there is no concept of creator, deity, or incarnation. It, however, teaches the doctrine of rebirth and asserts that living beings are reborn endlessly, reincarnating as devas or gods, demigods, human beings, animals, hungry ghosts, and this continues. In Tibetan Buddhism, an enlightened spiritual teacher, that means a Lama, is believed to be incarnated. Unfortunately, Buddhism does not foreground a heavenly divine reality that comes in flesh in the world, but the ethical and moral aspects of both Buddhism and Christianity are important as common grounds for dialogue. Islam completely rejects the doctrine of incarnation of God in any form. In Islam, God is one and neither begets nor is begotten. In that sense, Islam is much closer to Baha'i ideology. Though the God of Islam has a lot of commonalities with the God of John's Gospel, the aspect of incarnation stands unique in the fourth Gospel. Mainstream Judaism totally rejects any doctrine of any incarnation of God and absolutely rejects any concept of an incarnation of God in any form. But among the Hasidims, there is a similar kind of belief. In that sense, John's understanding of the incarnation is unique and not in tune with the popular Jewish understanding. Hinduism, we see a lot of similar expressions to understand the concept incarnation with a local flavor. There are parallels between the fourth Gospel and the Chandogya Upanishad. In the Chandogya Upanishad, the sage begins his teaching with the words, "In the beginning, being or Sat alone existed, one without a second." In that sense, Jesus as the Word was fully God, according to the dialogical understanding between Christianity and Hinduism. The Word becoming flesh and dwelling among humanity is one of the incarnation aspects of the fourth Gospel. While Jesus is portrayed as the incarnation of God in the Gospel, a similar concept, avatara, is used in Hinduism. The word avatara comes from the root meaning to descend. And Rama and Krishna are considered as avataras of Vishnu. We can refer Gita, Bhagavad Gita, 4th chapter 7 and 8. There are cities between the Johannine logos and the Hindu concept of Om. The divine sound Om is derived out of three sounds, A, U, and M, that represent the three Vedas and the Trimurti of Brahman. Brahman represents A, Vishnu represents U, and Shiva represents M. In the Upanishads, Om is considered as the primordial sound, or Adi Shabda, and a symbol of true existence. It is considered as the totality of the manifested world, Ekakshara, the one syllable, or the imperishable one, or the Pranava, signifying a droning utterance, symbolism of a sacred syllable, and a prayer or mantra of all other mantras. This understanding of Hinduism goes well with the pre-incarnate and incarnate forms of Jesus in the fourth Gospel. Keshav Chandra Sen considered Brahman as Sat, Sit, and Anand. Sachidananda means being, intelligence, and bliss. For Keshav Chandra Sen, in the words of Robin Boyd, the Logos, then who is eternally lay as it were asleep in God, is the word of creation, or Sit, or intelligence, or wisdom, ever at work. In the development of the eternal created world, and in the fullness of time being born as man in Jesus of Nazareth. Robin Boyd puts it as follows: Christ is the image of God, or Brahman, and in him the eternal word, or intelligence, or Sit, the fullness of the Godhead dwells. In the refrain, victory or jay or glory is ascribed to him who is the true Narahari, or man God. So Jesus is the Narahari in his incarnational form. Jesus, the Logos, can resonate with the Sat as he is one with Brahman, Sit as he is the divine wisdom from above, the Avadara as he came to establish righteousness and justice in the world, and the Adi Shabda as he is God's eternal voice in the universe. Appasamy and Chakraya were in favor of using the term Avadara, or incarnation. But Keshav Chandra Sen and Brahmobandha Ubadhyaya felt that to call Jesus an Avadara was to reduce him to the level of one of many Avadaras of popular Hinduism. That is the criticism. Let me come to the concluding remarks. The Johannine concept of incarnation resonates in many ways with the Greco-Roman ideology of the concept, Jewish understanding of the concept, synoptic usage of the term, and the other world religions and their conceptualizations and terminologies. For John, Jesus as the Word is equal in status with the Father, distinct from the Father, relational with the Father, made inferior to the Father temporarily for missional purpose. He was not a mere reflection, but the Word became flesh. Creator of the universe, liberator of humanity, lived pre-incarnate in status, accommodated with the world from below through the incarnation, exemplified his missional incarnation to reconcile the world from above with the world from below. The idea has several similarities in Baha'i, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, and Hinduism. But John is unique in his own terms. John's missional incarnational theology is not parochial in its sense, but it is gnomic and universalistic in its essence. Thus, John is accommodative in several respects when it comes to its ideology of incarnation, but he places it with his own innovative missional, Christological, and theological ends. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Johnson Thomaskutty, for your profound and brilliant presentation. We all benefited with the rich knowledge and wisdom that you have given to us. Your presentation is very interdisciplinary and also very interreligious in its nature. You have wealth of knowledge. Thank you for unpacking a number of differences between synoptics and Johannine Gospel. Thank you so much for exploring early century Platonic philosophy by quoting from early patristic authors. Philo of Alexandria, Stoic philosophy, Platoism. It is fascinating to see how Jewish background and its influences, Neoplatonic implications, have made a profound remark. Thanks a lot for exploring creatively the nature of pre-existence of Jesus, washing the feet of disciples as a servant. Thank you very much, Professor Dr.
Welcome.
Johnson Thomaskutty.
Thank you.
Friends, now the floor is open. Your questions should focus on the topic. Your questions should be precise. After you ask question, please unmute yourself, because at present we have almost 150 people here. Over to the floor.
Thank you very much, Dr. Johnson. It's great to hear you. I am very much pleased about the presentation. I'm Jnanavaram from Madurai. My name is not there.
I know you.
Yeah, my name is not there in the blog. You know, normally there is an understanding among the New Testament scholars to differentiate between incarnation Christology and adoption Christology. They say that the Synoptic Gospels have adoption Christology very much, and John has only incarnation Christology. That's one area that I would like to hear from you. And the second thing is, normally it is taken from Bultmann that incarnation Christology is more philosophical than the historical importance of the Synoptic Gospels. I am not very happy about it, because for me, incarnation is so much historical, and it talks about so much about historical experience. Historical in the sense, John has so much political, John has so much economics, John has so much socio and historical things in his gospel. Therefore, I would like to request you or ask you to elaborate on that particular issue, that John was so much philosophical, not historical. But for me, John has more historical, not, I would not say that than the synoptics, but equal to the synoptics, because we see so much of economic things in John's gospel, and importance to women in John's gospel, importance to the disabled people in John's gospel, even importance to slaves in John's gospel. So John's gospel's theology has so much impetus for our involvement Christology, not merely a philosophical Christology for me. And finally, you were comparing with the Hindu avatar and John's incarnation. But some of you, as some of us, we know the avatar theology in Brahmanical Hinduism is to endorse the domination. But here, the incarnation in John's gospel is to challenge the domination. I repeat, Hindu avatar has been used to endorse the domination of, the status quo. But John's gospel challenges the domination, as I have already explained to you. But thank you so much for the presentation, and I'm happy about it. Thank you.
So may I answer? May I go ahead? Yes. So thank you so much, sir, for this wonderful question. And it needs a lot of exploration to find the answer for this very important question. Especially, John has the incarnational theology, Christology, whereas the synoptic evangelists have the adoption Christology. Is that this categorization, okay, is one of the significant aspect we see among the gospel scholars. As I have rightly mentioned while I was discussing, the synoptic evangelists are more dealing with the historical aspects. Okay, the synoptic evangelists are dealing more with the historical, tangible aspects, and John is more to do with the philosophical as well as the poetical aspects. But at the same time, use that John is more historical than synoptics in several aspects.
Absolutely.
For example, in order to understand the period of Jesus' earthly ministry, if we calculate from the point of view of the synoptic gospels, it is merely 1 year. Only on the basis of John's gospel, we can argue that Jesus' ministry was at least 3 years. Okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
in that case, is that John is more historical in several respects than the synoptic evangelists, and also more geographical and topographical and archaeological in essence, because John gives more details about the topographical and geographical and various other tenets than the synoptic evangelists from the point of view of archaeology. So in that case, the archaeologists also find it very important that John is more historical in several aspects. That does not mean that synoptic gospels are not historical. But synoptic gospels have the tendency of developing the story from one end to the other in a sequential manner. But John has a lot of disruptions in between. That makes John's historicity a challenging one for the scholars. Otherwise, when we think about the Jewish festivals, the archaeological aspects and the geographical and chronological aspects, John has more historical clues than the synoptic gospels. And the most important thing is, for example, R.A.T. Robinson. R.A.T. Robinson is one of the significant Johannine scholars. His priority of the fourth gospel, that makes it clear that the fourth gospel has more historicity than the synoptic gospels. So in that case, as a Johannine scholar, I may say that, or Johannine student, I may say that John has more historicity. So in that case, John is never behind the synoptics in proving it historical aspects. But at the same time, it goes even beyond historicity and takes the philosophical ground for grounding the person and work of Jesus with a different idiom and a different flavor that we have to appreciate.
Thank you very much.
With regard to the Incarnation Avatara, of course, I would have brought some insights of John's gospel in relation to the Dalit and feminist and tribal and various aspects. That is the missing part of this paper. That may be developed and included in the next stage.
John has more ground for Dalit Christology than any other gospel, in my view.
Sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Definitely.
Thank you, sir. Some more questions also they have been raising. Samuel Laldin Sangha. Can you unmute and raise your question, please? Samuel Laldin Sangha. He's asking question publicly. Professor Johnson Thomaskutty, sir, I'm asking on behalf of him, who created us, God the Father or the Logos, Jesus?
So who is the creator? So is that is a very significant question. So according to John's gospel, Jesus as the pre-incarnate word was sleeping in God. That is what some of the philosophers use the word. Jesus as the pre-incarnate word was merged or sleeping in God. That means Sat and Sit were together, merged together, okay, as homoousios. So in that case, the creative activity was done by God. That is the Godhead altogether. Okay, where Logos was the creative agent. Logos was the creative agent. So from the point of view of the Jewish understanding, okay, the Memra, the Torah, and various other Hebrew concepts are, okay, related to the utterance of God. So in that case, Jesus as the Logos was the utterance or the dialogue of God within God himself, and in the fullness of time, it came into being in flesh and tabernacled among us. So that way, the pre-incarnate word was, or Logos was, merged into God. Okay? At the fullness of time, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. So in that case, God, through the initiative or the medium of the word, created the entire universe. That is what I wanted to say right now.
Thank you, sir. The next question, Reverend Mohammed from Scotland. You raised your hand. Unmute and raise your question, please.
Yes, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much for this very informative lecture. As I was listening, I was thinking about incarnation and incarnational theology. Any theology should have some practical and outworking or implications of it. So I was waiting for that, that you would comment on some practical implications of the incarnation of Jesus or missional aspects of it. And I don't know whether it was kind of lack of time or the length of the paper. Would you mind commenting on the missional or practical implications of the incarnation in Johannine theology or his gospel?
So that is a very important question. You see that is at the next level of this paper, okay? So is that goes beyond the framework of the prologue of the Gospel of John. So when we come out of the prologue of the Gospel of John, is that the word as an agent of God comes and dwells among humanity. Okay, that means he accommodates the life patterns, he accommodates the worldly systems, and accommodates the law and the nature of this world. So that way is that the word as an agent of God is uttering. So there comes the 7 I am sayings of Jesus. So when we explore the 7 I am sayings of Jesus in the Gospel of John, that is not missional. How? For example, is that when we come to chapter 6, Jesus says that I am the bread of life. When he says that I am the bread of life, after feeding people with the physical bread, Jesus says that I am the bread from heaven. So is that is why in John's Gospel, chapter 6, both the feeding the 5,000 and the bread discourse are going together. After feeding the 5,000, after filling the hungry, Jesus says that I am the bread from heaven. That means he was walking his talk. Again, when we come to chapter 9:5, Jesus says that I am the light of the world. When he says that I am the light of the world, after giving sight to a blind person, he says that I am the light of the world. In chapter 10, verse 7 and 11, he says that I am the door of the sheep and I am the good shepherd. When he says that after taking care of the sheep, the Samaritan woman in chapter 4 is the best example. She was taken care. The royal man in chapter 4, his things were taken care. The invalid person in chapter 5, the blind man in chapter 9, all their concerns were taken care, okay, taken up by Jesus. Then he says that I am the door of the sheep and I am the good shepherd. Again in chapter 11, Jesus says that I am the resurrection and the life. When? After giving, okay, life back to Lazarus. After raising Lazarus from the dead, he says that I am the resurrection. In chapter 15, Jesus says that the one who is turning water into wine is the true wine. So is that John's gospel is fully oriented, mission oriented. So in that case, in John's gospel, speech and action are going synonymous, hand in hand. Okay. So that is why you said Jesus' words are also missional. All the utterances of Jesus are having the other side, an action orientedness. Okay, in that way, Jesus is the one who walks his talk. That is one of the incarnational implications of the theological framework of the fourth gospel. Even you see that the phraseologies in John's gospel, the death of Jesus on the cross was one of the significant, okay, missional aspect according to John's gospel. Why? From the beginning, the readers are attuned towards the death of Jesus through the catchwords, the hour of the Son of Man, lifting up of the Son of Man, and glorification of the Son of Man. All these catchwords came into fulfillment by the death of Jesus on the cross. So in that case, the fulfillment is finished in John's gospel. The accomplishment of God's, okay, is one of the significant elements in John's gospel. For example, you see the first 12 chapters we see the public ministry of Jesus. But in chapters 13 till 17, we see the private ministry of Jesus. So in that case, Jesus' mission includes both, okay, public enrichment, pastoral, private enrichment, pastoral, and public discourse, that is more missional. So in that case, John's gospel is more pastoral and missional. Both these elements are going side by side. Thank you.
The final question we can take from Jabu Jai Singh. Your question should be precise, then we can conclude. Jabu Jai Singh, unmute and raise your question, please.
Yes. Thank you, sir, for your presentation. I think I am audible.
Yes, yes.
I want some clarification between the incarnation and the avatar. In Hinduism, there are many avatars.
Yes.
But in Christianity, Christ's incarnation is unique and once for all. How can we connect this incarnation with avatar?
So that is the most important question, is that there are so many problems in relation to, okay, using avatar and incarnation side by side. Okay, that aspect I have already explained. Is that how I explained? For example, Brahmoband is that Appasamy, the two Indian Christian theologians like Appasamy and Chakraya, they were in favor of using, okay, avatara as a synonymous term with the incarnation. But you see that scholars like Keshav Chandra Sen and Brahmobandha Upadhyaya were hesitant to use incarnation and avatara in synonymous terms. So their opinion is that, their statement is that if we use avatara in synonymous terms with incarnation, we are reducing the significance of incarnation, okay, as one among many avataras. But the most important thing is, in the Indian context, we can use these as synonymous terms, okay, for dialogue, but they are not accurate terminologies, okay, using one for the other. That always we need to understand is that the different religions are framed in different axioms, different ideologies, different terminologies, and a different, okay, philosophical framework. So when we compare one religion with the other, we may not get the exact, okay, framework. For example, John himself is the best example. John was using one of the popular ideologies called logos that was prevalent in the Greco-Roman world, in the Jewish world, in the Gnostic philosophy, and he framed his own theology out of that. So the same way, we can use Avadara, nothing wrong in that, okay? So we can accommodate, but we can disrupt. That is a post-colonial terminology. We can accommodate those, okay, in order to accrete our theological framework. But at the same time, we have to go and explain things in our own idiom. That is what John is doing. Okay, in that case, I wanted to say that incarnation and Avadara are not one and the same. They are different because they both developed in two, okay, religious frameworks. But for dialogical purpose, we can use, okay, in order to make a bridge between Hinduism and Christianity, we can use these terminologies. Thank you.
Sir, thank you so much, Professor Johnson Thomaskutty, sir, for sharing your rich knowledge and wisdom. I'm sure this has enlightened all of our thoughts. Thank you very much for raising questions. I really thank all the participants for your questions. I'm sure you have a number of questions. We can continue to ponder upon these questions for the days to come. Thank you very much, one and all. Have a blessed evening.